What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. For those of you who are new, thanks for visiting. In today's video, we got a 2001 Yamaha R6 that needs some work. Let's get into it. Alright, moving into it. So, the background in this bike, let me tell you a little bit about it. So I bought this bike months and months ago, and I actually totally forgot about it, which sounds crazy. I had it sitting inside a trailer, and I just thought about it the other day. I'm like, man, I gotta get that thing back out. I totally forgot about the bike. I bought this bike from a gentleman who sold it to me at what I thought at the time was a pretty good price. It had kind of a rod knock to it, so I don't know what the issue is yet. We'll double check to see what is going on, obviously. But that's kind of the background to it. When he started up, you could hear when he'd rev it, it had kind of a knock. Not real bad, but bad enough I knew it was there. And he kept trying to rev it, and I kept saying, dude, please don't rev the bike. I get it, I don't want it if you keep revving it. And overall, I thought it was a really clean bike, and I wanted to keep it all stock because it was kind of a memorial bike if you look at it. Even though it's not the iconic blue, the red special edition here was really a pretty iconic bike, and I wanted to keep it the same. And I thought it was a really clean bike until I pulled it out of the trailer and started looking at some of it. There's quite a bit of damage. Not anything major, like little stuff like this I don't really care about. You'll start noticing that there is, if you can see it here, a ding in the tank. There's a big scrape here. A lot of the clear coat's missing. It's kind of tough to see, but there's kind of some nasty stuff done to it. And a lot of the fairings are cracked up. You can see just little marks here and there to the point where, at this point, it's going to probably need a full custom paint job. And that's kind of what we do these bikes typically anyhow. But again, typically with a bike like this, I wouldn't have done a full build. And the reason I bought this, because basically this was going to be one of those can I fix it builds, and how cheap can I do it if I can. For those of you that maybe new to the channel, aren't familiar with us, a lot of times we'll do full custom builds. Some things are just repair things, and other things are, hey, can I do it? And the reason we do that is I'm not an ASE certified mechanic or none of that. I am pretty much been doing it for years, put my hands on it, and I've tried to put my hands in and out of things. Yes, that sounds weird, but not what I meant. And, it's just pretty much, can I do it? And if I can do it, so can you. And that's what this channel is kind of based off of. And so, again, yeah, if I can do it, so can you. And there will be a lot of people that will chime in that will be experts that will kind of share with us something we could have done better or whatnot. And that's kind of what the channel is built off of, and that's how we do it. Enough about me, enough about the channel. Let's get into the bike. Like I said, these were really cool old bikes. I believe these were the iconic 600s that started the step seat. I'm pretty sure, because I don't know of any other 600s before late 90s that did that. So these bikes were the 600s to have back in the day if you weren't going with the larger bike. One of the cool things about these bikes, and it won't be really a review, is if you look at it from above, you'll see how narrow that the bike is, if you can kind of tell that. Much like you'll see on the Italian counterparts of these kind of bikes. The V-twins, basically, and this was able to be thin and tall, and so was the R1, and that made for really, really good riding and handling and carving bikes. So these things were great. They ripped for 600s, and I'll never forget, my buddy had this exact same bike, color and everything, against my second gen ZX10, and it stayed up with him pretty good. I was kind of surprised. Obviously, the Gen 2 walked away from it eventually, but this thing stayed up pretty well. You would have never thought it would have, and comparing it to some of the newer R6s, it's definitely very surprising. I think this thing would probably blow them away, honestly. But what we need to do right now is we need to figure out if I was right on the rod knock. What I did check was that the oil level in it is completely full to the top, which is not good, and that alone can give it similar symptoms to that kind of rod knock. But I'm going to play devil's advocate and figure that it's probably not the case. And if I had to guess, the person probably heard some rod knocking and decided to fill up full of oil because he thought he was low. That's usually the case. So the question there is then why did it get a rod knock? Because and if I'm going off what the previous owner told me was the truth, he said that he wrote it was perfectly fine, and then he started the next day or a while later and it had a knock, and it wasn't from him riding it. So I'm going to go ahead and say it was probably partially truthful. And if that is the case, it's either probably got an oil leak, which I haven't found yet, not even in the trailer where it's been sitting full, or he could have put the wrong grade oil, maybe too thick, and he could have spun the rod bearing by doing that as well. But the first step in this right now is I'm going to pull off this lower fairings. They got to come off anyways. But I'm going to drain the oil. I'm going to see how much oil's in it because I know it's too full. I'm going to look at the oil to see if there's any shavings inside it. And if not, we're going to fill that oil back up to the correct height, and we're going to start it up, see if this thing runs, and it still has a knock. So let's get into it. Okay, and so there the lower fairing is off. It's actually pretty straightforward. You'll just see there's a bunch of random bolts around the edge where the mid fairing meets and a couple on the bottom. There's basically that many between both sides. That thing just drops off and pulls out of underneath. I can see by looking at it, there's really no oil leaks on it, so oil leaking wasn't the problem. Now it's time to drain this oil. We got a 17mm ratchet. We are going to pull the drain plug, which is right there, out. And something I want to show you guys is really weird. You'll see that I have this thing, like on a 1 1/8" metal block right there. This thing tips so much, it's about to fall over even with that. And it's got the original size tires, looks to be stock suspension, and I think the original kickstand that's not been cut. I don't understand why it leans so much. It's really strange. I even have the handlebars turned back the other way, so it's not so bad. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and drain this oil out right now. We'll see what it looks like. I picked up what I normally use is an oil pan from the Dollar Tree. And the cool thing is the new ones actually have quarts on them, or a measuring system. So the good thing about that is this thing's supposed to have 2.5 quarts. We're going to see once this thing drains exactly what I got into it and how much is over full and if the oil again is metallic. All right, just loosen. We're going to spin this thing out. I can do this without making a mess. Oof, man. Well, I can already tell there's water in that. There's no hiding that. So if I had to guess, I'd say this thing's got a bad head gasket, and that's the reason it spun a rod bearing. So this is a great thing about telling the truth about taking these bikes apart, because you don't know what you're getting. And now we know. Typically, again, if it's not a oil leak where it's run out low on oil, and it's not the wrong viscosity put into it, it's going to be because there was water in the oil, and basically the lower end starts to give out. So that means I'm going to need a new head gasket. That's not necessarily a big deal. It does make a little bit more work, but it's not a deal breaker by any means. It does save us the headache, though. I do want to see when this is all done if there's metallic flakes, which I'm sure there will be in it. Let me see what it looks like when it's all done pouring out. All right, so our oil is all done draining out, and right now I want to take a look at it. I'm going to guess it is coolant because it does have kind of a greenish tint. I don't know if you can tell that on camera or not. But we look at the measuring system here. We're right about 4 quarts, which is about 1.5 quarts too high. And assuming that maybe I'm a little bit of a slant in the garage, 1.25 quarts, still way too much. So what I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead and dump this into another container to see if I see any metallics and how much water is separated. Now, the good news is that this bike wasn't ridden like that. He was probably telling the truth, because if it had been, this would be oil, like the oil would be like white or gray. It'd be mixed in from running the bike with water in it. Clearly it's not, it's still separated, so that is good news in a way. The bike wasn't run, other than when the guy was revving it on me, with the water mixed in. So let's go ahead and drain that out and take a look at the oil. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and grab this container here. Hopefully you guys can see this on the camera and it's focused in for you. But I'm going to pour this out slowly. Right now all we're getting is oil. Obviously the water is going to stay at the bottom, which strangely enough, still not really separated. And I'm not really seeing a whole lot of metallics in it, which is kind of interesting all on its own. But it is got a green tint to it, so that's obviously room for concern. The good news is I'm not seeing any metallics at all, which you can tell this is not new oil. So it's not like he changed it and had just fresh oil. It's pretty dirty oil, but somewhat metallic free. So I'm going to keep pouring out here and try to get to the bottom to see if we get to any just water like we originally saw pour out. I know there was definitely water in it, without a doubt. This is where it's starting to get a little bit thinner. And that's the water there. You can kind of see as that separates there how much more water-like substance there is. And again, I don't know if this camera picks that up or not. It probably won't. There's a little shimmer in there that I can see on the camera, but not in person, which is odd. But I do see the separation of water, and yes, in that part right there, maybe because it almost looks like a metallic pearl. So that is our bearing material. In fact, it can be seen somewhat on the edges here we were pouring. I don't know if you can see that or not. It's kind of hard to get this close to the camera. But we do have some metallic in there. Not bad, though. It's actually not as much as I would have anticipated it to have. So what I want to do right now, that wasn't very bad for the amount of water, and it did sit for over a year and a half, and a lot of times it can accumulate moisture like that, but I don't assume it is. What I want to do is I want to take off the upper panel on the bike now, if I can swing it over here, that you can see right there. The upper panel comes off with 2 screws, and then I'm going to take off the cap of the radiator, and I want to see if it has, in fact, green fluid that would give it a greenish tint, which is more than likely what it has, and see if it's low. So that should be the first determining factor, assuming the guy didn't fill up the coolant, or put too much. That could be a leading cause of our problem, or show us exactly what happened. Okay, so that panel is removed. We're going to go ahead and spin off the cap counterclockwise. Looking down in there, I can literally see no coolant whatsoever. If I put it on a paper towel from the cap, I can see nothing, so it doesn't help us at all. But more likely, we got a bad head gasket if I had to guess. So one other thing you could do in this situation, if you do have leaking head gaskets, the water typically will steam the cylinder, the valves, and the spark plugs clean like new. So we can pull out the spark plugs and look at the spark plugs. We know that the engine has to come out, so it's not really going to make a difference anyways. So at this point, we're going to assume that, again, the head gasket is bad. We'll order some parts there, but I'm hoping, because of the minimal amount of metal shed inside the oil, that maybe we just tore up a little bit of the bearing and we can replace the bearings and not the crankshaft or the pistons. We'll look farther into that as we go. I meant rods, sorry, not pistons, or both actually. But hopefully we didn't do much damage to those and they're still salvageable, because that's where the build starts getting expensive. We don't want to go crazy on one, because really fixed, painted and everything, I'm going to guess this bike's somewhere in that 3,000-ish range. Not much higher than that, depending on how pretty we can make it. And you don't want to obviously put too much money into a bike just to get nothing back out of it. So it's time to move forward. Right now, what we're going to do is first pick up that the cap that I just dropped. But we're going to pull off the rest of these mid fairings here. We're going to start taking apart the spike exhaust and everything to go ahead and drop this motor out. And as you can see, all the lower fairings are now off, as well as the mid fairings and the upper inners. Time to go ahead and pull off the exhaust. This part's pretty straightforward. This is not necessarily a how-to guide. If this helps you guys, that's awesome. So I kind of point some of these little things out, but again, this is really just a main build in this particular video that you see here. But again, I'm going to show you a couple pointers on how to get these things apart and how I do it. To start, we got a bolt that we have to take off right there. We also have a mid-hanger that we're going to take off right there, if you can see that. And then we have our head bolts, 2 on each one. Obviously, there's 4, so there's going to be 8 total that you see. Sorry, right there. And after that, we got to drop the exhaust, and then we're going to pull out this radiator as well. When we do pull out these radiator hoses, we'll see if it was green or not. It doesn't really matter because we know it's leaking at this point. And yeah, so let's move to it and get it done. All right, so the exhaust is finally off. That took a whopping about 4 minutes. And now it's time to start taking a little bit more off to get this motor clear. One thing I do need to take off is the clutch cable you'll see right there. I've got a couple bolts that'll loosen. This thing will pop back and we'll slide that out. That'll be out of the way. Obviously, I want to take off the radiator so it doesn't get scarred. You could probably do it without doing it, but you're going to be fighting trying to wedge it up in there. It makes no sense when the coolant's probably mostly low anyhow. The other thing we have to take apart will be the wire harness and the throttle cables. And just to be safe, because there's a lot of wires going through it, I'll probably pull the tank off to get to all this stuff. That way we have a better view. But what I want to do right now, before I pull off this radiator and the clutch cable, I want to go ahead and separate the coolant hose right here, because I want to see what drains out of this thing. Is it green? All right, now the truth, not that it matters, but if we can break this thing loose without making a mess, which is not likely. Doesn't look very green. Yeah, it's yellow. And it's making a mess for sure. Like I said, not likely to be clean, but green enough that we know that that's probably what's in the oil. That's why it's not super green, it's more of a yellowish color. Nonetheless, suspect. Okay, so while we may not have a lot of metallics in our oil, if you could see all the metallics inside our coolant, you'd know something was wrong. So obviously, again, we know the head gasket's bad. That just is another example that proves that it was. I don't want to look too far into it now because we know what we have to do anyhow. It's time to pull off this radiator. This is pretty straightforward. We got a couple plugs up here, a couple hoses to pull off, and then one on the other side as well. And there's a lower bracket you'll see right there. And then we have 2 usually uppers, 1 on each side. And then it should pull right out. We'll have that out of the way. And then off comes the tank. All right, so it's time to pull off the tank. This part's actually really easy. You got a bolt back here. You got 2 here in the front that go through these right here. Then you're going to pry it up like I have it right now, and what you want to do is disconnect the fuel pump here. You got 2 overflow tubes that you're going to pull out that you'll see right here, and then you'll have this tube right here to disconnect that you see here. And then what you want to do is make sure you have a pan underneath it. I don't know how much gas you have in it, and if you didn't siphon any out, you want to be careful. This will still probably leak all over the floor. So I have a pan for it to sit in, but I'm going to try to angle the tank so obviously most of that gas stays inside there. Typically these old gas projects, I stick in my mower, it still works, and put fresh gas in all the builds. So let me go ahead and pull that off, and then we'll start moving to the wiring. Okay, and so the fuel tank's now off. I went ahead and pulled off the air box. Not a whole lot to show there. It's really easy. There's just basically 4 little Phillips screws that hold onto the bottom right here. You got a 10mm here, and then a few hoses detached for the vacuum. And that's really it. The whole thing pulls right off. Throw it to the side. It's now time to start disconnecting some of the wiring. First, you need to start off by taking the negative battery cable here off and making sure that it is not going to touch for any reason whatsoever. You'll probably want to tape that up. One of the next things that I do is I always disconnect wires. I'll put a piece of tape on both sides of the connection, put A and A, B and B, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever you want to do. So you label it. When you go to put this thing back together, you're not guessing. Because in my past, Yamaha likes to make the same plugs for multiple things. It can really screw you as far as not even letting your bike run. I had that in one of the first builds we did when we did the Street Fighter 07, I think is what it was. Total headaches. So I always do that. It gets rid of any headaches that could possibly happen as far as wiring being switched around. So I'm going to do that now. I'll disconnect everything, and then we'll start disconnecting some bolts so we can lower this thing down. Okay, so moving forward, I went ahead and disconnected the throttle cables, as I mentioned earlier. Some of you might disconnect it at the actual carburetor. Some of you might want to pull the carbs right now. The carbs are kind of difficult to get off the actual engine right now. So in my opinion, I thought it was easier just to pull them at the handlebars, do what you want. That's personal preference. But now it's time to start unbolting the engine. I'm going to show you exactly what I'm going to do. So to start, we have a bolt right here and a bolt right here, okay? This bolt tightens this bolt down to keep it sturdy. I'm going to go ahead and loosen this bolt first, and then the same on the other side. We'll loosen and remove both of this bolt. Coming around to the other side, we have 2 bolts that we have to take from here. We have one here, and the very final one that we want to take, 2 final ones. The second to last will be right here. We'll knock that out with a pin or a hammer or a screwdriver, whatever you have to get that thing out. And this will be the very last one. At that point, where you're down to the last 2, we're gonna have a jack underneath this thing, lowering it down. At the last one, we'll be able to actually hold this thing and slowly lower it down. At that point, making sure that there's no other cables, wires, or anything else attached to this thing. And at that point, we'll have a motor that's completely free and ready to be worked on. Okay, and so you can see all the bolts are out now. One little tricky thing that Yamaha likes to do, there's kind of some retainer nuts that are, I don't know if they call them plugs or what you call them. If you can kind of see in there, it's kind of almost like a flathead, and they turn just slightly into the motor, and it's kind of a fail-safe that if the bolt was to come out, it's still holding the motor in. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna go ahead and turn those out about 2 full turns, and then you'll see if they stop, they don't come out anymore. And that's just enough to free this motor, and now you can see that everything's kind of lowering down. So I lowered it maybe 1.5 to 2 inches, just again to make sure there was nothing else connected. Luckily I did. There's another wire here that I found, so I was able to label that, but that's kind of the reason you do that. So I got a little bit more to lower it down now, and then what I'll do is I'll back this up and pull this thing out, and we'll have our motor to throw up on our bench. Alright, and so before we continue to take all the bolts for the actual frame out, there are 2 major components that need to be removed on this side. Can you see what they are? That's right. The chain right there and the shifter linkage. If you do not take these things out, the motor will not break loose. You got to make sure to do that. So what we're going to do is take a 10mm socket or an open end wrench, and we're going to remove the shifter linkage here. And then probably what I'm going to have to do is remove this reservoir here so I can get the front sprocket off, or cover off, to get that sprocket loose and pulled to the side. All right, so I got all that apart. Now, typically what I do is just be pulling this main nut and pulling the front sprocket off. Fortunately, I'm lucky enough that this chain's been replaced before and it has a master link. So all I gotta do is remove that master link and just loosen the chain and pull it up over top of the sprocket. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now, and then we'll continue moving forward to the engine bolts. All right, and there you have it. The motor is finally out. It was about 15 minutes of haggling. It really wasn't bad. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't pulling any wires or yanking on something I didn't want to. And oftentimes when you drop these motors, a lot of people drop them on that front fender and destroy that front fender. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to hit that either. But also I'm used to pulling out 1000cc engines. That's typically what we build, not 600s. And I just assumed it was going to be a lot heavier, and it really wasn't. It weighs, like, I feel like almost nothing. Even though I have a problematic back right now, I probably shouldn't even be doing this. It was really light. I thought it was still connected to something. It wasn't. It was just sitting there on the jack. So Pull the jack out, there it sits. We're gonna move the bike out of the way. We're gonna get this motor up on a hoist and then onto a some sort of bench and start taking the thing apart. Figure out if we can replace just the bearings and the head gasket or what we gotta do to keep it as minimal as possible to get a good running engine again. Okay, so now we have the engine sitting on top of a stand, and what I want to do is go ahead and pull out these spark plugs to obviously check to see if we can see anything on them, as I said before, showing any kind of cleanliness or wear from the bad head gasket. Something I do want to do is look at the engine. I did notice a couple different things. I did notice on the side of the actual valve cover there is some gasket seal, which means it's been off before. And then I've seen this, which is upside down for you, but it looks like it says 99 R6 ML unknown. So I would assume that stands for mileage unknown. So this motor has been replaced. It's not the original motor, more than likely, especially if it's out of a 99. I'm assuming it's not just the valve cover, that's the entire motor. Otherwise, would they write that on there? Probably not. I did notice there's some stuff caked up there. That's pretty typical. Nothing else major. I don't see any cracks. I don't see any JB weld. Everything else looks pretty good. You can see the timing cover here has been taken off. Something that we do have to keep in mind, again, it may not have been a bad head gasket that had the water leak in. And the reason I say that, these older R6s are known for having the inner mechanical seal inside the water pump here going bad. And essentially what happens, if you look at the picture above, you'll see the mechanical seal right there. It actually ends up going bad, and then the impeller that you see right there starts wearing against the case housing, which is this right here. And that leads to larger chunks of metal being shed, and that would make sense if we looked at our coolant. The chunks were kind of larger, unlike what we saw in the oil. So there's a good chance that the head gasket may have been fine, but this is our core culprit right here. We'll know better as we rip into it, but for now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull out the, obviously the coil packs here, and I'm going to pull out the spark plugs one by one. We'll assess the situation then and see if that was the actual problem. Okay, and so here we have all 4 spark plugs pulling from cylinder to cylinder, as you'll see. The very first one, I don't know if it'll show, is dry and sooted, so there's obviously no coolant coming in there. The second through fourth one, or second, third, and fourth one, all have a little bit of dampness to them. None of which were steam cleaned. And again, that could have been a possibility that didn't happen because we know that the motor didn't run long enough to have those things cleaned off in it. I went ahead, assuming it was gas because of the way I have the motor sitting right now, I went ahead and assumed that the gas was just kind of dumping in and maybe getting to the cylinder. However, I've given it a couple minutes and this is still wet looking, which means it's more than likely probably coolant if I had to guess. So that didn't really tell us a whole lot. We don't know for sure. And all I can really do at this point, I think, is move forward and take off this cover right here to see if I see any damage inside. Because one of these housings, if this inner seal is bad, it's going to show some kind of damage. Obviously, it's going to show flaking. The next step after that is obviously to take this piece off and see what we can find in the bottom side. So let me do that real quick. I'll show you what I find. Okay, so far in my findings, I haven't seen anything real bad inside the water impeller. There's a little play back and forth, that's normal, but not a whole lot side by side, a little bit, but I don't see any major scoring around anywhere at all whatsoever, not even on the inside. So there's a good chance that our mechanical seal is probably okay there, and that it more than likely would be a head gasket problem. Now, looking at the bottom of the pan here, if you look right there, that is our bearing material. So we know that the bearings are bad. We knew that already. It's not really a big deal. But you can also kind of see how much water's in all that, or coolant, more than likely. So you can see there's quite a bit of material as well. So it could be a situation where this is not just one unit. It might be more than one. It also looks like somebody has brazed this oil pickup as well. I don't know if that's the way it came or not, but that is kind of strange. Like, I've never seen that before. What's going to happen right now, basically, is I'm going to shove a long screwdriver up this way and one down the hole of the cylinder, and I'm going to work the pistons back and forth to see which one of these has a problem, and at that point we'll realize exactly which ones we have to work on and what all needs to be done, hopefully. Okay, so at this point, I can't feel any play, and again, what I'm doing is I'm taking a screwdriver like so, and I'm pushing it on the bottom of the piston, and I'm putting one through the cylinder side up in the front, through the spark plug hole, and I'm kind of pushing them back and forth, trying to get movement. Now, sometimes what'll happen is that the crankshaft will be ovaled out, where the bearings go, and then you'll have to, you'll only get play like every 90 degrees or so, and so it might not see it that way. I can't test the third one here because there is stuff in the way, so I thought, I'm just going to start taking this thing apart because it's got to come apart anyhow. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pull these upper bolts that you see right here. I have to pull off both side covers, and then I'm going to flip it over on its back, and I got plenty more bolts to come out, and then we're going to go ahead and separate this case while it's on its back, and then we should have better access. We'll probably have to pull out the tranny to see everything, but this is important where you start taking, maybe not a Dodge Viper as a desk, but taking something and start laying things out so when you put this thing back together, you remember. Also, if you guys are doing something like this, make sure to take pictures because pictures will always help you when your brain doesn't. So let me get that taken apart. I'll show you what I find if I do. Okay, so I got a little carried away taking things off. Obviously, I took off all the covers. I had to remove the oil pump, which is kind of tricky in a way. You also have to take kind of the clutch out to kind of wiggle it out and pull at least what I had to do is pull the chain over top of that lower sprocket, kind of like you would on a bicycle. It wasn't hard to do, but there was really no other way, and there were some dowel pins that hold in basically the oil pump here that the bolts go through, and I couldn't get those to separate from the actual oil pump. But if I had, that probably would have cleared and just pulled off to the side, but I couldn't seem to get those out. So that's the method I had to take. But now it's time to kind of pull these cases apart. Hopefully I don't drop anything. I may not do this on the camera because, well, I'll probably drop something. So let me go ahead, jump off here, get that off, and I'll show you what I see. And here is the cases split. So nothing crazy. The odd thing is I don't see a whole lot of wear on our crankshaft or our bearings. So if I look at this, most of the lines you actually see is just oil. I can wipe that off, it disappears. And then when I come back over here and look at our bearings, yes, I can see wear obviously because you can see some of that copper. But that's not nothing crazy to where the bearing is missing and there's any crazy damage. But while we have this out, it's a good thing to look at the dogs, I believe is what they call for the transmission, which the early Yamahas are known for, more so the R1s because of the torque. But these are basically dogs here, and what they do is they slip into those little caveats there, those little holes right there. And essentially what you will see is along the edges of these holes and along the edges of these actual dogs, they'll be wore off and they tend to slip out of place, and that's why you're basically second gear will jump. We've done videos on those before. Nothing really that we need to focus I can see right now. More concerning part is why don't I see more material removed from some of these bearings? Now the only other bearings that I know of are going to be the bearings on the actual end caps for the rods, which are going to be these here. And so what we'll have to do is pull those off and check those out. Something's got to have wear somewhere because we see material. I don't know where it's coming from, but I know it's got to be from somewhere. So I'll keep searching. I'll try to do a piston test again by moving them back and forth. If nothing, I don't know where to go from here. Alright guys, so looking into the very first one, I already found the problem. It is the actual rod bearings, and I'm going to try to get you the best look I can because we're up so high and we just have no room in here right now because there's projects everywhere. I need to start getting rid of some of these projects. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of sit you there. Hopefully you can focus well enough that you can see. And actually before I do that, you'll see that I have that there and this here, and this is again what I'm going to be pushing back and forth to find that play. So when I lay this camera here, if it'll sit, it probably won't because it doesn't like me now because I found its problem. See if that'll work without falling. And so what you're going to find is that I'm going to go back and forth. You see that there? That is where our rod bearing is officially bad. And this is just the first one I tested. I would imagine the other ones may be bad as well. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's usually just the end one. But we'll find out. But that is the play that we do not want. Hopefully that is just the rod bearing and not the crankshaft. We'll know better once we get that rod bearing off and we're able to test to see how round the actual crankshaft itself is. Now typically the crankshaft is much harder than the others. For that very reason, it's not supposed to destroy itself. We'll find out if we're lucky. Alright, as to be figured, the other cylinders seem to be okay. It's just this outer one, which a lot of times, I don't know why that happens. It's always the outer one, but if you look at this, actually compared to the other end caps, you can see it's black and it got really, really hot because there was water on it. There was no oil, and basically it ran with water for lubrication instead of oil. And maybe that's the side, actually that is the side that the kickstand is on, and because water actually will sit at the bottom of oil, this might have been in it because it's got a crazy kickstand. Maybe this was just sitting in water because of that very reason. That's why these ones didn't get harmed, because this was the one that was in the water. But you'll notice there's absolutely no bearing material on this at all whatsoever. It's completely gone. What is or was there is right here on the side. So that obviously needs cleaned. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to push this piston forward, and I'm going to see if there's anything on the top side, and then I need to mic the actual crankshaft itself to see if it's out of round. If it is, we're screwed. We need a different different crankshaft. If not, it's a pretty easy fix. Okay, so I was actually wrong. I just went to mic it after I pushed the piston up, and the bearing fell out. I didn't realize it was there. You can still see the top half of it is still there. So I'll go ahead and take that off as well. It does feel thinner on one side than the other, which is actually really good news for us, because that means that maybe it's out of round and not the crankshaft, or so we're hoping, because this is much softer metal. And yes, I can feel this side of it is thicker than this side. I'm sorry, this side's thicker than this side, and you might be able to see that. Not a huge difference, but enough to give us a little bit of play. Again, I'm going to test this right now to see if we are lucky. We're probably not, but it'd be awesome if we were. Okay, well, so not so good news for me. I got my mic out here. It's set to 29.95 millimeters. When we play it this way, you'll see it's a very small amount, maybe 1/10 of a millimeter, but I can move it back and forth. When I do it vertically, it's tight that I can slide it on, it doesn't move. Which means we are out of round, which stinks, because now we need a new crankshaft, or having a shop basically regrind that down to match a new bearing, which I don't really want to do. So my first instinct is going to buy a used crank. Hopefully it tests out well, and then I'll just swap everything over to the new crank. That's not really hard. We've done this in a ZX10 build before, and actually turned out really well, and the owner now has over 3,000 miles on that bike with 0 issues, so it's worked out well. But the key is finding a good used crank. So I do have a shop locally that could turn this down and get me new bearings. I could bring it to, and that will be my second option, because obviously I don't have the lathe equipment and stuff like that. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna get that in order. You shouldn't know a difference. I'll be back and we'll see where we're at. Alright guys, so in this video, we're calling it a wrap. Stick around for the next episode. I'm gonna try to make it a 2-part series, and that's it. We're gonna finish this bike, we're gonna get it running, we're gonna repaint it, make it look great, and have a great, good looking, good running bike. Stick around for that next episode. If you guys aren't already subscribed, definitely hit that button. And if you like this video, hit that thumbs up. Oh, also, don't forget to comment below on what you guys think about this build, and what maybe I could have done better, or what I did right. I'll see you in the next one.